Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our free webinar today on streamlining laboratory efficiency. My name is Tracy Surzan. I'm the president of PGLA, and I have with me here today Greg Cenker from IndySoft. Next slide.
Yes.
Next slide.
Hello,
Greg.
everyone.
Oh, hi, Greg. Okay, next slide.
Okay.
Oh, sorry about that, Greg. I think we're had a little issue with the PowerPoint.
It looks like we may have lost Greg. Let's try and get him back on.
I'm sorry, everyone. Hopefully we didn't drop too many people. I did not mean to do that.
That's okay. We're okay. If you want to go ahead and there we go. Very good. Okay, so today we're going to talk about discussing lab management, turnaround times, performance measurements, how to detect bottlenecks and ways to evaluate and improve your overall system. And what I liked about this topic is that this is not just really for laboratories. What Greg's going to talk about today is just really looking at big picture things and looking at turnaround times even from any type of organization and how to make those improvements and get your staff on board to make those changes. So yeah, I found this to be a very interesting topic. And again, it's not just for, although Greg's background is from the, from a calibration metrology type of industry, this can be applied to really any type of laboratory or really any type of organization. Okay, next slide. Just some webinar housekeeping before we get started. So this webinar is being recorded. All webinars are made available on our website and then also our YouTube channel, all available there on our website. If you haven't noticed already, everyone is going to be muted for the entire time for this webinar, but please use the questions toolbar on your far right to put questions in and we will be answering those at the end. Next slide. So what I wanted to do is just bring up a topic because we're an ISO accreditation body, and this goes well with what Greg's going to be presenting on today, is just to point out, and as you're learning from Greg today, think about 17025 or really any of the ISO standards has a requirement for management review. So under section 8.9 and 8.9.2, this is not all the requirements that you have to have for management review, but these things come to mind when you're going through an assessment and you're documenting how you did your management review. A lot of times they're in forms of minutes and attached documents and how did you track your trends? How did you track your performance levels? Have you done better from one year to the next? So these are all these little bullet point items here to think about, when you're doing your management review and how you really can get a good feel on your performance levels. Again, from your customer turnarounds to, how quickly your staff is performing, or how well they're performing, and how you can improve. So I want to just point that out. We're not going to be talking about necessarily about management review today, but this goes, well with that ISO 17025 requirement. Next slide. And just to point out, to go well with Greg's presentation today. Everyone probably has heard this quote: "You can't manage what you don't measure." And hopefully everyone today will take some points from Greg's presentation to think about this and how you can really apply some of these techniques within your own organization. Next slide. Okay, so let's go ahead and welcome Greg Cenker from IndySoft. Greg is a metrologist and the calibrations product manager with IndySoft, who works closely with the development, marketing, and sales to ensure that calibrations.com becomes the go-to source for calibrations related content, software, and support. Greg has over 38 years of experience in the calibration industry, starting in the United States Marine Corps and mostly recently as a metrology engineering manager with Northrop Grumman. There, he managed SureCal, Northrop Grumman's software platform for automated calibrations, and previously has had metrology roles at HES, Southern California Edison, Fluke, and has been a long-term member in the calibration and metrology community. He also has contributed as a speaker at many industry conferences and was presented the Whittington Award at the Measurement Science Conference in 2021. And in addition, he's been contributing a member of the NCSLI RP-1 committee, establishment and adjustment of calibration intervals. So Greg, tons of experience. We're really happy to have you. I will go ahead and hand this over to you, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Tracy. Hello, everyone. Well, this is going to be based on an experience that I had with one of the companies that I worked for. We had an issue with late calibrations, delinquent calibrations, bad turnaround time, disappearing test equipment, and I was pretty much thrown into a hornet's nest and tried to figure out what was the root cause of all this stuff and how could we make improvements without simply throwing more money at the problem. So with that, I'm going to cover some learning objectives that I'm going to try to get out of this presentation today. Understanding some key performance indicators, just a metric to see, how you are, how you've improved, where you're going to, what your game plan going to be like in the future. Estimating laboratory throughput and capacity. Estimating turnaround time with respect to workload. Identifying some easily missed bottlenecks. And I'm saying that word easily. It's not easy to identify them. You have to go through some pains to find them, but I'm going to try to show everyone how I approach that problem to where I could see exactly where my equipment was being held up. Do I need any extra human resources? Is this going to be for a prolonged work period, or is it going to be temporary, and possibly revising my turnaround time? Big questions, why are we doing this and why should I care? Being a lab manager, what's the biggest concern most folks have? It's turnaround time. That's really the biggest thing. It's turnaround time and overtime. So let's talk a little bit about what drives it. Backlog drives it, but why do we have a backlog? Is it because we have a lack of resources, whether they're human resources and or physical standards, or do we have a lack of procedures? Do we have a lack of training? And this is an item here that a lot of managers kind of gloss over. Items inducted into the lab are mostly out of tolerance. I've come across that in the past, and that kind of gives you pause. It's like, why is it everything that is inducted into this one lab always seem to be out of tolerance? Is it because the customers are mishandling their equipment? Or is it because the person that's in the lab doesn't have the proper training, or their procedures are outdated? There's a lot of digging you could do with that particular bullet item and find out why you have such a high OOT rate. Lab capacity. Do we have sufficient resources allocated? Staff overwhelmed? I could give you a great example of that. One company I work for, we have metrology engineers, and they were wasting their time doing such things as vendor cert review. I ended up doing a cost analysis on it and found out that I was probably spending upwards of $230,000 to $245,000 a year just in their time to look at vendor certificates, where if we had a dedicated QA specialist sitting in that position, they would be able to, that would be their full-time job. So I was taking engineers off of things that they should probably be doing that are important, and they're doing things like, cert reviews, and they were also doing things such as finding different vendors, calling customers, returning emails, a lot of built-in efficiencies. Overtime, that's the big one too. How much is needed in order to reduce backlog? And is the time allocated to the job and task reasonable? I'm going to touch on this a little bit. One of the handouts I believe that is in the package is a way to kind of calculate how much overtime you need and how many resources you may need for a job. We'll get to that in a little bit. In the company I work for, here's the problems that I discovered. I got hired. I took a month and a half basically to understand how the process worked, how things are presently going, and what kind of outstanding issues do we have. We had some unresolved audit issues from a previous year that were never addressed. So I tried to uncover those and see what needs to be done in order to fix them. But the one thing that I noticed is we had a very, very high internal turn time, 38 days on average for 95% of the work conducted. So stuff that we could do in-house was sitting there for 38 days. High vendor turnaround time, 180 days for 95% of the items inducted that got outsourced before they got returned to the customer. We had a high rate of new calibration tools added to inventory on a daily basis. We had a high rate of tool inventory loss. At the time I took over this project, there were about 4,000 tools that were unable to locate. They were lost or nobody knew where they were. High recalibration delinquency rate. We had an external audit, and there were 18% of our total calibrated tool inventory was delinquent. And part of that was lack of department ownership. There was no key personnel in these particular shops that were taking charge of their test equipment inventory, and there was lack of corporate visibility because to get the data that was required for these different shops was pretty much hidden in a bunch of databases, and you had to be able to do queries and go across platforms to get the data. So one of the problems that I realized, they had no standard hours established for any items that they calibrated. So there was no standard hours for me to go by. The only thing that I had to go by with for a metric was the use of calibrations received per week based on the previous year and how much did we process. So at the time I did this analysis, we had a backlog of about 300 items. We had 5 employees, and this is no joke. They were working 10 hours a day. About 162 items a week. That calculates to max workload of about 8,100 calibrations per year. But what's bad about this is it still doesn't address the why do we have terrible internal turn time. So I took the data from the previous year, and this is around 50% complete, was done within 5 days. 73% of all the inventory received was done in 10 days, and in 38 days, 95% of the inventory was taken care of. And what does this look like graphically? I mean, this looks horrendous. So the blue line is the median, which is right about 5 days. The red line is the average, which averages about 10 days. But the green line is all the test equipment. So that 95% of the stuff that was inducted into the lab just had a horrible turn time of around 35 to 40 days. So one thing I had to get my hands wrapped around was the projected growth. So I didn't know which model was going to be significant. So I assumed no growth, which is not likely because we were growing at quite a rate of 162 cows a week, and we already had 300 items in backlog. So doing Excel just with a linear growth rate, we expected about 40% more calibration test tools And those of you who know about ARIMA methods, ARIMA method is autoregressive integrated moving averages. So it's a regression line that regresses upon itself. It's pretty accurate. When I was working for Southern California Edison, I used to use that method to forecast grid reliability. So it is pretty accurate. But going with these forecasts, if we had zero growth, I would still need somebody to work in the lab a half a day. I've got 0.4 bodies that I need. If we were planning on linear growth, I would need about 2.5 people, 2.3. And then if we use the ARIMA growth, I see that I need 2.6 people in the lab just to be able to keep up with the volume and continue delivering the same terrible service that we were, which is a turnaround time of about 38 days. So this is what it looks like. So the blue line is the true data that I had to be able to model the future forecasting from. The black line was created by a program called At Risk, which is made by Palisade that I used to use when I was forecasting grid reliability, and I no longer have access to that. But being that it regresses upon itself, the black line gives you a pretty good indication of where your growth is likely going to be when you forecast out. Now, the green line is simply the Excel prediction method, which is just right in the middle. And I like to say this, assumptions based on average values will give you the wrong answer on average. So although the green line is definitely an average, it really doesn't represent of where you could possibly go in the future. So I started keeping track of all this stuff at the end of March in 2014. And by 8 of the same year, we grew to almost 19,600 active tools. Almost 9,000 had active shop resource codes. Almost 6,000 were R&D, and 4,639, about 24% of them were considered lost. Now, one thing that I wanted to really do to bring visibility to this is if you take, I don't know what these tools cost. There was nothing that was in the database that said how much each individual tool cost. But if you take an average of $50, because most of these were hand tools, torque wrenches, micrometers, vernier calipers, etc. Right now at 4,639, you're looking at roughly $1.16 million in unaccounted inventory. I mean, that's a gigantic loss. Tools gained since I started keeping track of that, almost 3,000 tools. We were gaining 20 of them a day. And if that trend remained constant by the end of the year, I'm using a company called MegaCal here to protect the innocent, but we would have had over 22,000 active calibration tools in our inventory. And this is what the growth rate really did look like. This is exactly what it did. So when I presented this back to my boss, and I said, this is kind of where we're going with regard to growth rate and resources and what we're going to need and what this is going to entail. Excuse me. He said two things in the same sentence that I will never forget. He said, I don't know what that is, but I fundamentally disagree with it. So I don't know how you could say in the same sentence, I don't know what that is, and I disagree with it, but he managed to do that. But that's where we ended up. This is where we actually ended up being when I started keeping track of it. We had over 19,500 tools. So additional findings, we had a high recalibration delinquency rate. We found 18% of our total calibrated tool inventories were delinquent. And primary reasons, pardon me for one, primary reasons were we didn't have anybody in each department that was taking ownership for it. And I mentioned before there was a lack of corporate visibility. Folks in the company couldn't see what was going on because there was no visibility, and everything in this company was dashboard metrics. They had dashboards for everything, but there was no visibility for calibration delinquency rate. And another thing that was interesting is I found that certain departments would, when they couldn't find a tool, they would transfer it to another department shop manager without them knowing about it. You know, that was pretty incredible. So to get my hands wrapped around this, the first thing I proposed was a physical inventory of each department. I didn't care what the database said that each department was supposed to have in their inventory. All I asked the shop resource managers to do was take a physical inventory and just give me the asset numbers of what it is you have in your physical area. What my game plan was to take everything that everyone laid claim to as, okay, these are valid test tools. Tools that nobody laid claim to were considered lost. So once everybody agreed to these are the tools that we have, and these are ones that we don't know where they're at, what I did is I had each one of the shop service resource manager and the director acknowledge that these tools were lost. And I put a copy of the lost tooling attached to the calibration record in our database. If a tool was later discovered in that department and they said, hey, I found this, by the way, then they would have a director level sign off to be able to induct that item back into the calibration program, because they had already said they scoured their area and they found these are all the tools that they had. So clearly it was a benefit for them to do the inventory correctly, because afterwards they had to get director level approval to put them back into the system. So with all that in place, then we had a really good department that did nothing other than make metrics and KPIs. So I went to them and suggested a dashboard that would be visible to everyone in the company, every shop, along with the shop owner's name, their management name, and their delinquent rate, because zero tolerance was mandated throughout the company, that you wouldn't have any more calibration tools that were past due. And if they wanted to digitally transfer a asset to another department manager, I fixed that to the point of you could put it in the request to transfer the tool, but the other receiving manager had to sign off on it and digitally sign off on that before the transfer ever took place. So what the result was, after I went to the dashboard timekeeping department, was every shop resource manager had their name, and this was the assets that they had that were due for calibration. So in the next 20 to 30 days, they had 16, this particular guy, I'm gonna focus in on Bill here, he had 16 assets that were due in greater than 20 and less than 30 days. And although this one doesn't work, on the live dashboard, if you were to hover the mouse over the count of 16, it would bring up the actual assets and show you where the location was, where they sat. Same thing for anything that was due for greater than 10 days and less than or equal to 20 days. And if it's due in less than 10 days, then it showed up red. And as this got closer and closer, nobody wanted to be on the I had delinquent tools, because the whole company was now able to see which shop manager had tools and how many they have coming due, so they have plenty of time to do their planning. So public awareness was first and foremost, to give everybody a visual of what's coming due in their queue for the next 30 days. So with public awareness comes another tool that was received widely by our QA department, but not so much for the shop managers, was public shaming. So what this dashboard showed, and by the way, this dashboard that you're looking at right here was to the right, and this dashboard was to the left. And what it had is it had the same shop service managers and how many delinquent counts they had year to date and what percentage of their total inventory was delinquent. Now, I just did this for a visual, but Tom's case, for example, he had 16 delinquent counts year to date, and that's 35% of his inventory. So being that everybody in the company had visibility to this, that prompted the shop resource managers to actually want to turn in their tools on time. So now that we know what tools are truly in the calibration program, and we're managing that, and we've segregated the lost tools from everything else, now I need to figure out why is the in-house turnaround time so bad. So one of the tools that I utilize is a PERT distribution to see what my probability of success and probability of failure is going to be by reducing my turn time. PERT stands for Program Evaluation and Review Technique. What it is, it's a statistical tool that's used by project managers, and it's designed to give you an answer of how long it may take to complete any given project. And turnaround time and estimating calibration time is no different than estimating a program or a project. This distribution takes 3 arguments that are very easy to input: the minimum time it's going to take you to do a job, the likely time, and the maximum time it's going to take to do the job. So by using what I already had, the information I had, said, okay, my minimum time is going to be 5 days, my average time is 10 days, and 95% of them I'm going to say is 38. Now, the reason I didn't use a number larger than 38 is because there were some outliers that were in that data that made absolutely no sense, such as in-house turnaround time 155 days. You know, didn't want to say that because that would throw off all my metrics. So by using these 3 simple inputs, I found out that 90% confidence I should be able to turn my internal turn time should be 25 days. Now, 25 days and not 38 is because the PERT function uses probability theory. It's not just simply averages. And when applied to the metrics that I just demonstrated, 5, 10, and 38, it'll draw a statistical curve that looks similar to this. So what does it actually look like when you graph probability of failure and probability of success on top of it? Is at essentially time 0, you have nearly 100% chance of failing the project, and you also have 0% chance of succeeding. The line, the PERT always crosses at the median. So the median probability of success and probability of failure is always going to be at the median point, which is going to be about the 50% point. So if I take this out and I take it out to what it suggests of 25 days, where the horizontal and the y-axis intercept, is going to give me, well, I could be pretty sure that around 25 days, I'm going to get 95% of my inventory out the door. So why is the internal turnaround time 25 days? Yeah, I didn't know that answer to that either. So in order to figure out that answer, I had to map out our entire laboratory flow process. So once the process was fully mapped out and I understood where it went from the time it was inducted to the time the tech picked it up to the time it went out to the vendor, et cetera, there's events that are triggered. So each new event has to be triggered by a previous event. So what I did is I went from event to event to be able to calculate if there was a bottleneck and where it was. So this is a very simplified version of what my flow process looked like. So this is the stuff that was out in production. Once it got received in the lab, well, how long did it take from the time it got in the lab till somebody picked it up? Once they picked it up, how long did it take to finish the calibration? Once they finished the calibration and it went to awaiting return, how long did it sit in awaiting return until the customer came and picked it up? Same thing with the vendor stuff. It was received in lab, it's going out to the vendor. I'm awaiting for a vendor. I sent it to the vendor. It's at the vendor. It's received back from the vendor. Now it's awaiting vendor review. Now it's ready for calibration complete. And it's ready for pickup. So I mapped out all these processes. So each one is a delta time. Now here was what I found out. The most received equipment for internal cal was actually processed in about 3 days. The real problem was after the calibration is complete, people were just not coming by the lab and picking up their equipment. So our internal clock kept on ticking until the items were picked up by the customer, and that was considered our dock-to-dock time. So to fix this problem, I was able to use IndySoft and use an escalating daily email reminder. When the calibration was finished, email was fired back to the equipment owner or the person that dropped it off and said, hey, your equipment is done, come pick it up out of the lab. If they didn't pick it up by the next day, then it went to them again, and now it went to them and their supervisor. If by the third day it wasn't picked up, it went to them, went to their supervisor, went to their manager, and then if there was a fourth day, it went to the director, and it would preface it on the third day, this is notice 3 of 3. So with that in place, and people kept getting notified, and their managers were getting notified, that took care of people taking equipment out of the lab. So our internal turn time was, yes, it's 3 days to actually do the work, but now it's about 5 days once the customer picks it back up. That's really what it was for dock-to-dock time. And unfortunately, this caused some unintended consequences, because if we go back to this slide here, and we see this, we have the public shaming, nobody wanted to be on that list. Nobody wanted any delinquent calibration activities on their record, because that stayed there for the entire year. So what ended up happening were now the shop resource managers were scrambling, turning their test tools so they weren't counted as delinquent. Well, the Cal Lab wasn't open 24/7, but the factory worked 24/7, so there wasn't any personnel available to check in their test equipment. What I was able to do with, again, using IndySoft, this is what this company had, and I had never seen it before until I went to work for this company. I created a self-check-in kiosk. We had a small little vestibule in the calibration area that was sealed off from the rest of the lab, where folks could come by and drop off their equipment. So I put a self-check-in kiosk and had a QR tag on the desk. All the person dropping off the equipment was scan the QR tag that said begin your process, scan their badge, scan their equipment, and then press finish once they were complete with it. After they were complete with it, an automatic email went out to the customer that just dropped it off with a list of the items that they inducted into the Cal Lab, and now their clock stops ticking on their end. Secondary problem, vendor turnaround. Although the vendors suffered a lot of the previous same thing from the internal turnaround time, is that people weren't coming to pick it up. There was also a secondary issue with that as well. If you look at the media time was about 30 days. The average is about 50 days. I mean, I typically see 30 to 45 days typical for most vendor from dock to dock. But again, we had 95% of all the equipment that was turned around, that was turned back to the customer, that was vendor related, looks very similar to the same thing that was going for the internal calibrations. And sure enough, that was part of it. But what was also a part of it is there was a lack of visibility. I could see how many items were out to a vendor and for how long if I ran a report, but I didn't have the personnel to be able to keep on top of it and say and call up these vendors and make the required follow-up calls. Where's the item? When's it going to be delivered? You know, we really need this. So part of the solution was, instead of dealing with all these vendors that I had, I found a local source that was able to calibrate most of the things. They could calibrate at their facility, and I ended up consolidating about 40 vendors into a single source. And that vendor could do most of the work, and like I said, locally. We scheduled a bi-weekly pickup drop-off to ensure that the service was constantly being provided for our customers. So instead of 53% of our vendor calibrations being returned in 30 days, now we went to 92% being returned in 30 days or less. That was a pretty big win. So just to wrap up, I wanted to go over again the key performance indicators. In this case, what did it take to go from checked into calibration to how long was it until it got picked up by personnel? How long was it until after it was complete, did it go back to a waiting customer? How long did it stay on a waiting customer until the time they picked it up? Estimating laboratory throughput and capacity. I could go over that in a little bit more detail in a few moments here. Identifying easily missed bottlenecks. Yeah, it was an easily missed bottleneck, but it wasn't so easy to actually get to that process and map it out. The big win was bringing the visibility to process owners, the directors, and the company. Once that visibility was no longer obscured by some IT folks running data reports and sending them out to email that most people probably had automatically sent to their trash. This was on a company metric, on a company dashboard, which was played on the monitors in every shop and in the entire factory floor. By using the PERT distribution, I was kind of able to see what we really were with respect to time. And I was able to innovate efficiencies before adding additional personnel. And this was the big win here. Delinquent calibrations went from 18% to less than 0.02% company-wide after that was implemented. So before I conclude, I will show a couple of things. I believe this is in your handout. I'm not going to cover this because we simply don't have time. There's a tab under here for workload planning, and it'll figure out how many bodies that you need. I'm just going to leave that as self-explanatory for right now, but this is the PERT calculator, and I don't know how much of this you guys can see because my screen is pretty large, but I'll try to expand upon this a bit. So again, all it takes is 3 entries. So if your minimum time is 1 hour, your likely time is 1.5 hours, and your longest time is 4 hours, then I could be 95% sure that this job is going to take 2.8 hours to be able to complete. And if I look here about 2.8 hours, I find out that that's probability of success is roughly 94% chance probability of success. So this requires a little bit more in depth because these aren't open closed-end functions, but I wanted to let you know that they are available, and it's something that's very easy to play with in your own facility. If you had 3 pieces of equipment and you want to know how long is it going to take to get all 3 of these done as a group, well, you have measurement equipment 1, you have 2 hours, likely is 3, max is 4. With these plugged in together, you can find out that doing all 3 of these pieces of equipment is going to take you 14.5 hours plus or minus 3. So basically 17, 18 hours should be the time that it would take to complete this particular job. And that's all I have for this. Oh, there is one more thing. So Tracy mentioned at the very beginning about management review. One of the things that I did for management review, I know this is a little bit off topic, but what I did for management review was a list on how our internal standards were performing with respect to what it said that we did in our QA package, or in our QA manual. So in our QA manual, it said that our end of period reliability was going to be 85% for the laboratory as a whole. So what I did when it was management review time is I took the report that I was able to generate from our database, and it gave me the reliability for each one of our laboratories that we had. And the ones that are highlighted in yellow were laboratories that were below 85%. But as a whole, our overall lab reliability was 90%, and that was because we kept on top of it by using interval analysis and utilizing that on a yearly basis as needed to bring everything within 85%. And that is all I have to present at this point in time.
Okay, Greg, thank you. Thank you so much for the information and sharing your story, and it seems like it was quite successful for you, and I learned a lot from you. We did get a question or a comment in the question bar, and I'm not sure if this was something that was intentional or perhaps we can re-upload, but someone had mentioned that in the handout section, we did include those charts there that you were showing, but they're in PDF. Is there a way you can show those in Excel?
Oh,
Excel?
the laboratory throughput and the per example.
Yeah.
The one that I just showed you, I can include it. I can include it so that when folks download the handouts, they could get that as well. But yes, I do have those available in Excel if anybody wants them to be able to utilize them. The PERT, I do not. I have additional backup slides explaining in depth what the PERT distribution does. Utilizing that with the Excel sheet that I just demonstrated will give everybody a good firm grasp on how that works, and I can make that available certainly. My apologies for not including it.
Okay. We can probably work with you after, and this goes on our website too, and there's the PowerPoint is downloadable too after, so we might be able to work with you on that and have people download those from our site if you want, or we'll figure it out. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So Greg, how did the employees, when you started doing this analysis, how did they react to you doing all this? Were they feared that they were going to get in trouble, or what was their reaction?
No, because how I approached it with the employees is I approached it in a case of, we have a problem. I don't know what the problem is. We have to find out what it is. And I'm going to ask everyone to do a couple additional steps on the computer, just kind of interrupting their workflow process, just so I could get the timestamps that I needed to find the bottlenecks that I had no idea where the holdup was. I didn't know what the big picture was, why we had the issues. So the employees, once they saw that everything was not about critiquing them or critiquing the job that they thought they were doing, the biggest pushback I got was from the shop resource managers, because nobody wanted to have time to do a physical inventory. Nobody wanted to take responsibility for saying, yep, these are what I own, I'm process owner of these, this is what I have in my area. That was the biggest pushback. And then I got pushback from some of the directors because they couldn't see wasting time doing that. But at the same time, they would also complain that metrology was giving them poor service. But we discovered that it wasn't that we were giving them poor service. It's like, no, you guys aren't picking up your calibrated test tools in a timely manner, and it's looking like we're providing bad service. That's really what it was. But the employees, after, because I explained everything, it wasn't like I did something covertly and then just kind of like dropped the bomb on them. I actually sat inside the lab for weeks, observing how the daily business flow went, and so I could help identify where the problems were. So they were actually pretty perceptive to it after I got involved with it, and I started showing them some of the results.
Okay. So I know you did this analysis first to be able to figure out where those bottlenecks were and why the turnaround was so bad. But did you end up hiring? Because it sounded like to me that you had quite a increase of growth of the number of calibrations you were bringing in. Did you guys end up hiring more people as well?
Yeah, they ended up hiring more people, but unfortunately, I didn't get to see the results of that. I can tell you right now that that laboratory is grown from the 5 people that we had to, I'm sure it's over 20 now. But I came in and I was tasked, and I just want to say this, that doing all this work that I did isn't because I'm so versed in it. I really, really had to step outside my comfort zone to be able to get this accomplished. And it also takes being part politician, because what was happening is I would have to make time to visit with some of these program directors on a weekly basis and see if they had any concerns. Were they getting the service that they thought we needed, that they thought they needed? And if not, how could we improve this? Because what I found out that if I didn't do that, then at the next management meeting, I got thrown under the bus. So I had to do that on a regular basis, and it's not something that I enjoy doing, but I found out that it was something I needed to do to get everybody's cooperation. So by doing this project, I really stepped outside of my comfort zone.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I find it difficult sometimes with, even though we're not a laboratory, but accredit the labs, even on our own accreditation body is, you know, we're getting really busy in this certain area, but at what point do you need to hire more resources? And sometimes it's hard to determine, or can you simplify a process so we can move a little bit quicker? And, you know, I feel that's kind of a difficult decision to make, or perhaps you don't have the budget, you know, you got to deal with who you have, you know, so there's all these things I think companies, you know, are handed with, or, you know, need to look at and figure out a way to still keep customers, you know, happy and stay within those timelines.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge for that was on the getting additional resources is that it was made very, very clear to me that throwing human resources at this problem isn't feasible until all other routes have been exhausted.
Okay.
So I didn't know what that meant, but it got to the point where, okay, I could pretty much say that all routes are exhausted, and this is our growth rate, and this is how many people we need. And I'm sure that ended up being implemented, because I know the company's got more than 20 techs working there now. So they did grow exponentially, and they're just going to have to add people, because no matter how you slice it, you have X amount of people that could get X amount of things done in a day, and you just, at the end of the day, you've got too much inventory, too much backlog, you can't take care of it. You're going to have to throw more people at it. But I did the best that I could with the resources that I had.
Did you find
I
with
see a
those,
question. Go ahead.
I was asking with those I call it report card, or you put up a chart there with how each lab manager or department manager was performing on their turnarounds. And like you said, no one wanted to be that person. Did you find at all you had any problems once that was starting to get in the eye of everyone, you know, everyone's view there on this person's doing, you know, I'm not doing as good as this person? Did you find any issues with non-conforming work at all?
No, I didn't. Matter of fact, there was and I didn't cover it here. I just remember there was an added side effect that happened as a result of this. So one of the things that I noticed is when we would have a cal failure, I was noticing that some of the shop resource managers didn't know what job they used what test tool on. So that's another thing that was being able to utilized in the company software that they had, is when they had work orders, whenever it went from one station to the next, you had the technician that scanned their badge, and they scanned the work order, and they scanned each calibratable tool that matched it to that work order. So if there's anything that came down later on the road that said it was a failed calibration, you knew exactly what component, which subassembly that you used on that particular calibratable test tool on. So being that it had that kind of visibility, the shop owners, the process owners, pretty much embraced that, because it made their job a lot easier, because prior to that they were just taking a guess. But nobody wanted to be on that list. You're absolutely right. But most of that onerous fell on me, because now that they were very much aware of it, they wanted to get their stuff in on time. So that's where the self-check-in kiosk came from. And then there was a few owners that came by and said, I don't agree with this. I don't think I should be on that list because I turned this in on time. Actually, no, you didn't, because this is who turned it in, and it was turned in 5 days late. And then the bargaining kind of starts, right? It's like, well, come on, it's only 5 days. Hey, late is late.
Right.
But there was a few like that, but largely everybody was pretty supportive of the effort.
Okay, I just got a question that came in saying, Greg, Why does the internal TAT, turnaround time, involve external calibration vendors?
Because we couldn't do everything. I mean, there was stuff that came through the lab, such as programmable network analyzers, you know, PNAs. You had signal generators. You had things that we couldn't do. What we could do, and we could do a lot of, we could do a lot of thread plug gauges. We could do a lot of accelerometers. We could do a lot of shock accelerometers. We could do a lot of pressure gauges, a lot of torque stuff, handheld DMMs, and some benchtop DMMs. Those we could do just fine. But there's, you know, microwave verification kits. Can't do those. Had to send those to Mori Microwave. There's a lot of things that we couldn't do internally. Helium leak detector testing. They had to be sent to a place in Utah. They were the only ones that were able to do these helium leak detectors. So there's plenty of things that we could not do in-house that we had no choice but to outsource at the time.
Okay. Just a second, I got a couple more questions that came in. Let me just.
Okay.
Sorry, just a minute, I'm trying to, here we go. Can this process be used for analytical laboratory turnaround time as well?
Absolutely, absolutely, because it's not a matter of widgets in terms of thinking at it in terms of a tangible thing. It's like how long does it take to let's just say that you're reviewing calibration procedures, and I could speak of this because back in 2006 I had a workbook set up, and I had calibration procedures that needed revision, and some of them needed minor revisions, some of them needed major revisions, and some of them need complete rework. So I sorted out the ones that were minor revisions, and I'm making this up. I don't remember what the time was, but it was like it would take 2 hours for a minor revision. It might take 8 hours for a major revision. It might take a week for a complete rewrite. So I would put those in my PERT formula and figure out, well, this is how long it's going to, provided I'm not getting any more procedures, this is how long it's going to take me to clear my list and get this project done. So the answer is yes, you could do it for any analytical stuff because the procedures were a procedure. It was how long is it going to take me to do this? So I still had to know my process. I still had to know where it was in my queue, and I still estimated a time based on that. Again, if you can't measure something, you can't manage it. So I had to manage my workflow somehow. So yes, you absolutely could use that for analytical laboratory stuff.
Right, really, that chart you can really use for anything. I mean, like I'm
Pretty much.
I'm going to be using it for some new things we're doing. So another question came in: is all of this baked into IndySoft, or are there plans to put that into the software?
I can tell you that the IndySoft, what I did at this point in time, it was not available in IndySoft. I had to create that myself within the software. But now they actually have a statistics module that does that exact same thing. And that's where this stemmed from, because I reached out to IndySoft. At the time I was having growing pains, and I said, this is my plan, this is what I want to do, and they gave me a way how to initiate them, and now it's part of their statistical module. It's actually in there. Everything that I'm showing you now, except for the PERT stuff, isn't in there, and the graph. IndySoft does have graphs, but it doesn't have the graphs like I was showing. That was something completely different. That was done in, I believe it was done in Tableau, but it was taking the real live data that I had in my IndySoft database, and it was populating the Tableau dashboard. But IndySoft now has programmable dashboards that you can have on your screen. As soon as you start up, you can see how many items are delinquent, how many are at vendor, how long they've been there. You could customize it any way you want. At the time I was using that, it wasn't there.
Okay. Another question came in. Did you capture an overall OOT percentage?
No, I did not. But so this is something that is now in a dashboard that you're able to configure into IndySoft. So one of the things that I've got is you want to figure out why is it that you have one lab that continues to go over your quoted costs, or why is it so high? Well, part of it, and this is just dummy data here, but well, this lab has got a 25% OOT rate. Well, is it because the equipment's coming in bad, or is it because you've got a training issue? It just gives you another tool to be able to dig into your process and see what is wrong with it and why you have bottlenecks. It's not really to go in and say, well, these techs in this lab don't know what they're doing. A lot that could be the case, but not necessarily. I mean, they might just get equipment from a customer that they abuse on a regular basis, and that's just the way it is. But no, to get back to the original question, no, I did not capture OOT rates. One thing I did do is when I would find an OOT, we wouldn't release it back to the customer until they answered a recall analysis saying, does this have any impact on product? And we would hold their equipment hostage until they answered that.
Okay. Okay, last question, if you can answer it, but it's a little off topic. However, can you share your experience at SpaceX? What, if any, working culture from SpaceX you have adapted now? So they're asking you about your experience at SpaceX and what you've learned and what you've adapted to now with your career.
Yeah, so the things that I've learned at SpaceX, boy, I'll tell you, I wasn't there very long because of the environment, but I learned so much in such a short amount of time in terms of stepping outside my comfort zone and trying different things and trying to see things from a manufacturer's point of view and being efficient and having a very good visibility recall system. So by seeing that and knowing what it took to get there leads me to where I'm at right now with IndySoft, to where I'm using my experience and my lessons learned of places that I've worked and helping IndySoft make a better product that has all these painful things that I had to do in the past, something less painful for somebody to do in the future. If it's in our software, and believe me, if I had a pain point in the past, I'm going to try to address it. I've got a whole palette full of things that I want to be able to put into IndySoft because they're challenges that I've had in my career, and some of them have been answered and some of them have not. But I've learned, so much by working at a company like that I've, taken what I've known and added this to it, and try to help IndySoft build a better product to better address customer needs. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, I think that was good. Thanks, Greg. Okay, so I think that's all the questions we have. If you could just flip to the next slide, just want to let everyone know. I'm sorry, I don't know why this slide does this to me every time. But anyway, we do have a couple more webinars coming up if you haven't registered yet. In a couple weeks, we have Mike Kramer, our program manager, doing a presentation on 6.2 of 17025 personnel. And then we also have another guest speaker from IndySoft, Walter Nelson, to talk about top FDA warning letters later, beginning of 2023 in January. So they both are on our website. Please register. Again, these are free and, only, an hour of your time, and you can download the information later if you do miss them. But it's a good opportunity for just to learn about different topics it's happening out there right now. Okay, next slide. I think that was it. Yep, then here's our contact information. If you have any questions related to ISO or need something from PGLA, you can contact me. Also, Kristen just put something in the, I think she answered a question from someone that wanted a copy of those documents too, that Greg was referring to earlier. We can try to get what we can from Greg that can be a usable sheet. And then there's Greg's email as well, if any questions come up. Okay, well, Greg, again,
Right,
thank you very much.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you for the invite, Tracy. I really appreciate it.
Okay, all right, everyone, enjoy your holiday if we don't talk again, and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you.